Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the entrance. The security guard's voice was calm, almost rehearsed, but his hand stayed firmly on the glass door before it could swing open. Nolan Mercer stopped without arguing. Beside him, his 11-year-old daughter, Lily, tightened her grip on the small paper bag she was carrying. Inside was a framed photo of her mom, the one Nolan had promised to place in the company's innovation hall that morning. "We're not causing any trouble," Nolan said evenly. "My badge should work." The guard looked at the screen clipped to his belt, frowned, then glanced back at Nolan. "It doesn't." A soft beep echoed from the access panel. "Access denied?" For a brief second, the busy lobby carried on as if nothing had happened. Employees hurried through the revolving doors with coffee cups and laptops. Visitors scanned QR codes. Delivery drivers rolled carts across polished floors. No one noticed the father and daughter standing outside. Lily looked up at him. "Dad, did they change the system?" "I don't know," Nolan admitted. That bothered him more than he expected. 2 years ago, he had stepped away from day-to-day operations after his wife's sudden passing. He still chaired quarterly board meetings, approved long-term strategy, and reviewed performance reports from home. The executive team insisted everything was running smoothly. For the first time since then, he wanted Lily to see the place her parents had built together. Not because it was impressive. Because it was part of her mother's story. Instead, they were standing outside like strangers. "Before we go any further, I'd love to know something about you. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever had a moment when you knew you belonged somewhere, but someone else insisted you didn't?" Nolan pulled his wallet from his jacket and handed over a government-issued ID. "There has to be a mistake." The guard checked it carefully, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. According to our system, you're on the restricted access list." Restricted. The word landed harder than Nolan expected. He searched his memory, wondering if someone had mixed up records or if cybersecurity had launched a new protocol without informing the board. Neither explanation felt right. Lily tried to smile. "Maybe we came on the wrong day?" He smiled back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll figure it out." That was what he always told her. Figure it out. It had become his answer for everything after losing his wife. Figure out homework. Figure out dinners. Figure out birthdays that still felt incomplete. Figure out how to be both parents at once. The company had become the one thing he believed no longer needed figuring out. He had trusted the people running it. Perhaps too much. The receptionist inside noticed the conversation and walked toward the entrance with a tablet in her hands. She scanned Nolan's driver's license, paused for several long seconds, then looked at him with an expression that wasn't confusion. It was concern. "Sir," she said quietly, "your profile isn't missing." She swallowed. "It was manually changed." Nolan didn't answer right away. He watched the receptionist's face instead. She looked less like someone who had uncovered a mistake and more like someone who had just realized she had opened the wrong file. "What do you mean, manually changed?" he asked. Her fingers hovered over the tablet before she quickly locked the screen. I'm not sure I should discuss internal records." The security guard shifted awkwardly. "Melissa?" She glanced toward him. "Call compliance." The guard blinked. "For an access denial?" "Just call them." He reached for his radio without another question. Lily quietly stepped closer to her father. "Are we in trouble?" Nolan knelt beside her. "No." She studied his face. "You always look people in the eyes when you know the answer." He couldn't help smiling. "And today?" "You looked at the floor." Children notice things adults missed. "I'm still figuring this one out," he admitted. Lily nodded as if that was enough. Inside the lobby, the morning rush continued. Employees greeted each other, elevators chimed every few seconds, and coffee machines hissed from the cafe near the reception desk. Life inside the building looked perfectly normal. That bothered Nolan more than the locked door. If something had happened to his access, why hadn't anyone contacted him? His calendar still included quarterly board meetings. Financial reports still arrived every Friday. No alerts. No phone calls. No explanation. Just one silent change buried somewhere inside a system he no longer touched. A woman wearing a navy blazer walked briskly across the marble floor carrying a thin laptop instead of a stack of folders. She wasn't rushing because someone important had arrived. She looked like someone responding to a problem that didn't fit any familiar category. Her employee badge read Claire Whitmore, Director, Compliance and Ethics. She stopped a few feet from the entrance and greeted everyone equally. Good morning. Not, what's happening? Not, who's responsible? Just calm professionalism. Melissa handed her the tablet. Claire reviewed the screen. Her expression remained almost unreadable until she reached one particular line. She read it again. Then once more. Finally, she looked directly at Nolan. Mr. Mercer? Yes. I'm Claire Whitmore. She extended her hand through the partially opened security door. He shook it. I'd like to verify something before we go any further. Go ahead. Have you requested restricted status on your own credentials within the last 12 months? No. Have you reported your identification as lost or stolen? No. Were you notified of any security investigation involving your executive access? No. Claire slowly closed the tablet. That's what I expected. The security guard frowned. I'm confused. So am I, Claire replied. She turned toward Melissa. Who approved this access classification? Melissa hesitated. It doesn't show. Claire frowned for the first time. Every manual change leaves an approval trail. Not this one. Nolan remained silent. Years earlier, when the company had fewer than 30 employees, he had personally insisted that every administrative action be traceable. No exceptions. Because mistakes happened. Power tempted people. Records protected everyone. Now one of the company's most basic safeguards appeared to have vanished. Or worse, someone had found a way around it. Claire looked back at Nolan. I can't reverse this from the lobby. I didn't ask you to. I know. She appreciated that answer. Most executives she had worked with expected rules to disappear the moment their title entered the conversation. Nolan hadn't mentioned his position once. He had only asked for an explanation. That difference mattered. Claire made a decision. There's a private conference room beside reception. The security guard immediately shook his head. Policy says restricted individuals can't enter the building. Claire answered without raising her voice. Policy also says compliance may temporarily relocate anyone involved in a potential system integrity issue. The guard looked uncertain. I've never seen that used. Neither have I. She slipped her badge across the scanner. A side access door unlocked with a quiet click. Then she turned back to Nolan. I'm not inviting you in because of who you are. She met his eyes. I'm inviting you in because something about this system doesn't make sense, and I'd rather find the truth before someone decides to erase it. The conference room was barely larger than a family dining room. A round table sat in the center, surrounded by 4 gray chairs. Frosted glass softened the noise from the lobby, but Nolan could still hear elevators arriving every few seconds and distant conversations blending into the familiar rhythm of a busy headquarters. For years, those sounds had represented growth. Today they sounded strangely foreign. Lily placed a framed photograph of her mother carefully on the table. I'll keep it safe, she whispered. Nolan smiled at her. I know you will. Claire connected her laptop to the room's monitor without saying much. Her movements were precise, practiced, almost methodical. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply worked the way people did when accuracy mattered more than speed. After entering several security credentials, a company dashboard appeared on the screen. Employee records, access logs, security authorizations, audit history. Claire selected Nolan's profile. The room fell quiet. His executive credentials were still active. His board membership was still listed. His ownership records hadn't changed. Nothing explained why he had just been locked out. That's impossible, Claire murmured. What is? Nolan asked. Your executive privileges exist in one database. She opened another window. But your building access is pulling information from somewhere else. She leaned closer to the monitor. There are 2 separate authorization records attached to your identity. Nolan frowned. There should only be one. I know. Claire clicked through another series of logs. The first profile identified Nolan Mercer as founder and chairman. The second classified him as a restricted visitor whose credentials had been revoked pending an unresolved security review. Same name. Same date of birth. Same employee number. 2 completely different identities. Lily looked from one adult to the other. Can computers get confused? Claire offered a small smile. Sometimes. She paused. But usually people confuse them first. That answer lingered in the room. Nolan folded his arms. When was the second record created? Claire checked the timestamp. 18 months ago. He immediately calculated the date. That was only a few weeks after he had informed the board he would reduce his day-to-day involvement to focus on raising Lily after his wife's death. His stomach tightened. I never authorized this. I don't believe you did. Claire opened the modification history. Several routine updates appeared. 1 software migration. 1 badge replacement. Nothing unusual. Then the trail stopped. The approval record is missing. Deleted? I don't know. She looked genuinely unsettled. Our system doesn't normally allow permanent deletion. Nolan leaned forward. What does normally mean? It means someone with extremely high administrative privileges might be able to overwrite certain audit references. You have people with that level of access? Claire hesitated. Very few. The answer didn't comfort either of them. A gentle knock interrupted the conversation. Melissa stepped inside carrying 3 bottles of water. She looked nervous. I thought you might need these. Thank you, Claire said. Melissa placed them on the table, then lowered her voice. I probably shouldn't mention this. Claire looked up. What is it? Melissa glanced toward the closed door before speaking. This isn't the first time someone has argued that the system flagged them by mistake. Nolan looked at her carefully. What happened? They were told security couldn't find their records. And then? Melissa swallowed. They usually left. Usually? There was one engineer who kept insisting someone had changed his access after he reported a safety problem in one of our warehouse robots. Claire's attention sharpened immediately. Do you remember his name? I think it was Daniel, maybe Daniels. Did anyone investigate? Melissa shook her head. People just said he was making excuses because he was about to be fired. Silence settled over the room. Nolan stared at the access logs on the monitor. For the first time that morning, the locked door no longer felt personal. If Melissa was right, his badge wasn't the real story. It was simply the first time the system had rejected someone who had enough authority to refuse walking away. Claire remained standing in front of the monitor, her eyes fixed on the frozen access log. What happened to Daniel? She asked. Melissa looked uncomfortable. I don't know. He stopped coming in after a few days. Did Human Resources contact him? I assumed they did. Assumptions aren't records, Claire replied quietly. The room fell silent again. Nolan looked at the family photo Lily had placed on the table. His late wife smiled back from the frame, frozen in a moment when the company had occupied every waking hour of their lives. They had promised each other that if the business ever became successful, people would matter more than numbers. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that reviewing quarterly reports was enough to keep that promise alive. It wasn't. Claire broke the silence. Mr. Mercer. Nolan. She nodded. Nolan, if someone intentionally changed your access, they expected one of 2 outcomes. What are they? Either you'd never come back. She paused. Or if you did, you'd leave before asking questions. Lily looked between them. So they wanted Dad to give up. Claire softened her voice. Maybe. We don't know that yet. Nolan leaned back in his chair. I could end this in 2 minutes. Claire knew exactly what he meant. One phone call to the board. One announcement to the executive floor. One public confirmation that the company's founder had just been locked out. The entire building would stop. So why don't you? Claire asked. He didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was uncomfortable. Part of him wanted exactly that. Not revenge. Control. To walk through the front doors, remind everyone whose name was on the original incorporation papers, and force every explanation into the open. It would also destroy any chance of finding out how this happened. The people responsible would have hours to coordinate stories, delete messages, and blame the nearest employee. Claire closed her laptop halfway. If we treat this like a personal insult, we'll solve your problem. She looked directly at him. If we treat it like a system failure, we might solve everyone else's. Those words stayed with him. For years, Nolan had measured success by expansion, revenue, and efficiency. Somewhere between board meetings and family responsibilities, he had stopped asking whether ordinary employees felt safe telling the truth. He took a slow breath. No announcements. Claire waited. No executive calls. She waited again. No one outside this room needs to know who I am until we understand what we're dealing with. Claire gave a single nod. Then we do this properly. She reopened her laptop and created a confidential investigation file. Before typing another word, she changed one setting. Automatic audit backup. Every search. Every file. Every change from this moment forward would be copied to an independent compliance archive beyond the reach of ordinary administrators. If someone tries to erase the truth again, she said, they'll have to erase it twice. For the first time that morning, Nolan felt they had made a decision that wasn't driven by anger. It was driven by responsibility. Claire let the backup process finish before touching another file. A green notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Independent archive. Synchronized. No, she said. If someone changes a record, we'll know exactly when it happened. Nolan nodded. And if they already changed hundreds of them? Claire looked at him honestly. Then we start counting. She searched for the same restriction code attached to Nolan's profile. The system returned nothing. That's impossible, she whispered. What is? There should be at least one match. She changed the search parameters. Still nothing. Only Nolan's file appeared. She leaned back, thinking. Someone may have hidden the code itself. Nolan frowned. Can they do that? They can rename categories, move records, or archive them under another identifier. So we're looking in the wrong place. Maybe. She opened the audit database instead of the employee database. This system wasn't designed for daily work. It quietly recorded every administrative action across the company. Thousands of entries scrolled past. Software updates. Badge renewals. Printer permissions. Door replacements. Nothing unusual. Until Claire noticed something odd. Every few weeks, usually late Friday evenings, dozens of employee access records were edited within minutes of each other. Not deleted. Not suspended. Simply reclassified. The same administrator account appeared every single time. No individual name. Only a shared credential. Admin 47. Nolan stared at the screen. Why would anyone use a shared administrator account? They shouldn't. Ever? Not if internal policy is being followed. She opened another report. The edits always happened after normal business hours. Always in large batches. Always affecting employees from different departments. Engineering. Warehouse operations. Customer support. Maintenance. No obvious pattern. Except one. Claire exported the list. Look at these dates. Nolan read through them carefully. What am I missing? They're all within a week of formal complaints. He looked up. What kind of complaints? Claire opened another internal dashboard. Safety reports. Ethics hotline submissions. requests for workplace accommodations, harassment concerns, equipment failures. One by one, names from those reports appeared again inside the access modification list. The room became very quiet. Melissa covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Lily looked confused. "What does it mean?" Nolan answered gently. "It means people asked for help. And they suddenly couldn't get into work." Lily frowned. "That's backwards." No one disagreed. Claire continued comparing records. One employee had reported faulty emergency exits. 3 days later, his building access changed. Another requested medical accommodations after an injury. Restricted. Another submitted evidence that warehouse robots occasionally ignored emergency stop commands. Restricted. Someone complained about payroll errors. Restricted. Different departments. Different managers. Different buildings. The same administrative credential. Admin 47. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. "This isn't random." "No," Nolan agreed. "It never was." He felt a knot forming in his stomach. For nearly 2 years he had believed the company's impressive safety metrics reflected genuine progress. Quarter after quarter, reports celebrated fewer incidents, fewer complaints, higher employee satisfaction. He had congratulated executives during board meetings. He had praised their leadership. Now another possibility emerged. What if the complaints hadn't disappeared? What if the people making them had? Lily quietly picked up the framed photograph again. She studied her mother's smiling face before looking at her father. "Mom always said fixing something starts with listening." Nolan swallowed. "She did. You told me that's why she liked building things." He nodded. "Because people would tell her what wasn't working." Lily looked toward the computer. "Did everyone stop listening?" The question landed harder than any report Claire had opened. Nolan realized he didn't know the answer. Maybe people had stopped listening. Or maybe people had learned that speaking up came with a cost. Claire broke the silence. "I'm requesting archived hotline cases." Her keyboard clicked steadily. "They'll take a few minutes to restore." Another notification appeared. "Access denied?" She tried again. The same message. Her own authorization had suddenly been reduced. Claire stared at the screen. "I've had full compliance clearance for 3 years." She entered her credentials again. Denied. Nolan looked at the timestamp. The restriction had been applied less than 60 seconds earlier. Someone else knew they were searching. Somewhere inside the building, another person was watching the investigation unfold in real time. Claire didn't move. She stared at the red message on her screen as if waiting for it to disappear on its own. Access denied? Not because she had entered the wrong password. Not because the network had failed. Her authorization level itself had changed. Nolan checked the timestamp again. 1 minute ago. Claire nodded slowly. "Someone revoked my clearance while I was sitting in this room." Melissa looked toward the closed conference room door. "They know we're here." "No," Claire corrected quietly. "They know what we're looking for." She disconnected her laptop from the monitor and closed the lid. "Automatic backup?" Nolan asked. "It already copied everything we opened before my access changed." "So they were too late." "For those files." She wasn't smiling. "They'll realize that soon." Lily sat quietly beside the framed photograph, drawing absent-minded circles on a notepad she'd found in the room. Adults kept talking about systems, permissions, and investigations. She understood only one thing. Someone inside this building was trying very hard to keep certain people from asking questions. Nolan leaned back in his chair. His first instinct was familiar. Call the board. Call the CEO. End this now. He could walk into the executive floor within minutes if he revealed who he was. The problem was, he no longer believed the executive floor was the safest place for the truth. That realization hurt more than being locked outside. He had spent years believing delegation meant trust. He hired experienced leaders. He approved budgets. He celebrated strong quarterly reports. He assumed good numbers reflected healthy leadership. Now he wondered how many people had disappeared from those reports long before they disappeared from the company. Claire opened a notebook instead of another computer. If the system won't answer questions, people still can. Nolan looked at her. You mean interviews? She nodded. Records can be edited. She tapped the notebook. Memory is harder to erase. Melissa hesitated before speaking. There are people who probably know something. Who? The reception staff. Claire looked surprised. They see everyone. Melissa continued. They notice who comes in upset. Who gets turned away. Who suddenly stops showing up. Nolan realized something he had never considered. Every organization had invisible historians. Not executives. Not directors. The people sitting behind front desks. Security officers. Mailroom clerks. Facilities crews. People whose jobs required them to notice patterns no report would ever capture. His company had thousands of employees. Yet the clearest picture of its culture might belong to the people nobody invited into strategy meetings. He looked down at his wedding ring. He still wore it every day. His late wife had challenged him constantly whenever he became too focused on efficiency. Go ask the people closest to the work. She used to tell him. They're living inside the decisions you're making. At the time, he always promised he would. Then another deadline arrived. Another acquisition. Another quarter. Eventually those conversations became memories instead of habits. Nolan slipped the ring around his finger slowly. I failed them. Claire immediately looked up. You didn't lock those people out. No. He spoke almost to himself. But I built a company where someone believed they could. The words hung in the room. Not as self-pity. As responsibility. Claire understood the difference. Most executives defended themselves first. Nolan was questioning himself first. That didn't make him innocent. It made the investigation worth continuing. A soft knock interrupted the silence. The same security guard who had stopped Nolan at the entrance stood outside the glass door. He looked uneasy. Ms. Whitmore. Claire opened the door. What is it? He lowered his voice. I just received a building-wide notification. Claire held out her hand. He passed her the printed memo. The subject line read, Temporary suspension of all independent compliance reviews. Pending executive authorization. Effective immediately. Claire looked at Nolan. This policy didn't exist yesterday. Nolan took the paper and read it twice. There was no signature. Only one approval code at the bottom. Admin 47. Claire laid the unsigned memo flat on the conference table. No company logo. No executive signature. No legal reference. Just a policy that had appeared out of nowhere, backed by the same administrative code they had been tracing all morning. That's not how governance works, Nolan said quietly. Claire nodded. It isn't. She turned to the security guard. Who gave this to you? It came through the internal operations printer. My supervisor told us to follow it immediately. Did your supervisor say who authorized it? He shook his head. Only that it came from executive operations. After he left, Claire compared the formatting with previous company policies stored on her laptop. The template is real, she said. But the approval chain is missing. Nolan looked toward the glass wall facing the lobby. Employees continued walking past, laughing over coffee, answering phone calls, completely unaware that someone inside the company had begun rewriting internal authority without leaving fingerprints. They're counting on people following instructions without asking questions. Claire looked up. And most people will. She wasn't criticizing them. Organizations depended on trust. When a document looked official, people assumed someone else had already verified it. That assumption was exactly what made abuse so dangerous. Melissa suddenly remembered something. The mailroom. Claire turned. What about it? Every policy update gets a distribution record before it goes company-wide. Electronic? And printed. Nolan saw Claire's expression change. If someone bypassed the normal approval process, she said, the mailroom might still have the original routing history. The archive. Claire grabbed her notebook. No. She stopped herself. If I walk in there now with my suspended credentials, they'll refuse to help. Nolan stood. Then let me go. She looked at him. You still don't have building access. I don't need system access to ask someone a question. Claire hesitated. You said we shouldn't reveal who you are. I still believe that. Then what changes? Nolan glanced toward Lily, who was quietly coloring on the back of an old meeting agenda. I've spent years expecting information to come up with through reports. He looked back at Claire. Today I'm going to do something I should have done a long time ago. Talk to people. He nodded. Not as the founder. Not as the chairman. Just as someone trying to understand what happened. Claire smiled for the first time that day. That's a better investigation than most companies ever conduct. Using the side corridor Claire had lawfully unlocked earlier, they reached a service hallway connecting the reception area to facilities offices. It wasn't a secret passage. It was simply a part of the building executives almost never used. The walls weren't decorated with awards or framed mission statements. There were maintenance schedules, delivery carts, employee bulletin boards, real conversations. A janitor pushing a supply cart recognized Melissa and waved. Two shipping clerks joked about a baseball game. No one paid special attention to Nolan. For the first time in years, he was walking through his own headquarters without anyone treating him like the most important person in the building. Oddly enough, it felt honest. Near the mailroom entrance, an older employee sorting inter-office envelopes looked up. His name badge read, Frank Delaney, Facilities Distribution. Frank smiled politely. Morning. Looking for somebody? Before Claire could answer, Nolan stepped forward. We're trying to understand how internal policy notices are distributed. Frank's smile faded just enough to be noticeable. That's an unusual question. Nolan nodded. So has today been. Frank glanced down the hallway, making sure no one else was within earshot. Then he lowered his voice. If this is about those emergency compliance notices. He paused. You're not the first people who've asked where they really came from. At that exact moment, Claire's phone vibrated. A single notification appeared on the screen. Unauthorized investigation detected. Report. Immediately to Executive Operations. Claire looked at the notification for several seconds before locking her phone. They've escalated. Frank quietly set the stack of envelopes aside. I figured they would. Nolan studied the older man's face. You've seen something like this before? Frank gave a slow nod. I've worked in this building for 23 years. He folded his arms. You notice patterns when you're the guy delivering paperwork nobody else wants to carry. Claire stepped closer. You said people asked about emergency compliance notices. Frank reached beneath the sorting counter and pulled out a worn 3-ring binder. Every department gets digital copies now. He placed the binder on the counter. But facilities still keeps a paper routing log. Habit from the old days. He flipped through handwritten initials, delivery times, and department codes. Then he stopped. Here. Claire leaned over. The memo suspending independent compliance reviews had an internal routing number. But one section was blank. Executive authorization. Instead, someone had handwritten, distributed by verbal instruction. No signature? Claire asked. Frank shook his head. Never had one. Who gave the verbal instruction? I was told it came from Mr. Harlan Briggs. Nolan recognized the name immediately. Briggs was Chief Operating Officer. He had personally recommended promoting him 18 months earlier. He said the CEO approved everything. Claire frowned. Did anyone verify that? Frank gave a tired smile. When a COO tells the mailroom something has executive approval, people don't usually argue. Nolan felt the weight of his own decision settling on his shoulders. He had trusted capable people. Somewhere along the way, trust had quietly become unchecked authority. Before anyone could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. 3 men in business suits rounded the corner. One wore an executive operations badge. Another carried a tablet. The third was from corporate security. "There they are," the security officer said. Claire remained calm. "Can I help you?" The man holding the tablet stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore, under temporary executive policy, you're instructed to surrender all investigation materials immediately." Claire didn't move. "I'll need a signed legal directive." "You've already received authorization." "I received an unsigned memo." "The instruction stands." Nolan watched carefully. No one had raised their voice. No one had threatened anyone. But the pressure was unmistakable. The executive operations manager extended his hand. "Your laptop." Claire closed it gently instead. "No. You understand refusing a direct order has consequences. I understand unlawful orders have consequences too." The hallway became silent. The corporate security officer looked uncertain. He wasn't reaching for anyone. He simply seemed caught between two competing instructions. The executive operations manager turned toward him. "Confiscate the device." The officer hesitated. "Do you have written authorization?" "You have my authorization." "That's not what I asked." For the first time, the manager's confidence slipped. Nolan stepped forward. "Officer." The man looked at him. "If someone asked you to remove evidence from an active investigation without documentation, would that match the training this company gave you?" The officer answered without thinking. "No." "Then don't start today." The manager cut in sharply. "This doesn't concern you." Nolan looked directly at him. "I think it does." The manager frowned. "And who exactly are you?" For a brief moment, every instinct told Nolan to answer with his title. Founder. Chairman. Owner. Instead, he chose something else. "I'm someone who wants this company to follow its own rules." The answer seemed to frustrate the manager even more. He stepped closer to Claire. "If you don't hand over that computer voluntarily, we'll deactivate your employment before lunch." Claire met his stare without flinching. "You can terminate my position." She rested one hand on the closed laptop. "But you can't terminate the backup that was created before you revoked my access." Color drained from the manager's face. "What backup?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence confirmed everything. He spun toward the corporate security officer. "Take the laptop now." Before the officer could react, another voice echoed down the hallway. "Nobody touches that computer." Every head turned. A woman in a dark navy suit walked briskly toward them, followed by 2 attorneys carrying document cases. She stopped beside Nolan and looked directly at the executive operations manager. "My name is Rebecca Sloan." She handed over her identification. "Outside counsel retained by the board's governance committee." The manager's expression changed instantly. Rebecca continued calmly. "At 10:17 this morning, an independent evidence preservation order was filed after encrypted audit backups were received through the compliance archive." She looked toward Claire. "Ms. Whitmore, thank you for preserving the records." Then she turned back to the group. "From this moment forward, any attempt to seize, alter, destroy, or interfere with potential evidence will be documented as possible obstruction." No one moved. The corporate security officer slowly lowered his hands. The hallway that had felt controlled only minutes earlier suddenly belonged to the facts instead of the loudest voice. Nolan looked around at the people standing there. The investigation had finally become bigger than any one executive. Exactly as it should. No one spoke for several long seconds. The hallway that had been filled with quiet intimidation only moments before now felt strangely still. The confidence that had carried the executive operations manager into the mailroom disappeared the instant an independent legal process entered the picture. Rebecca Sloan calmly opened a folder. "The board's governance committee has authorized an immediate preservation of all compliance records, security logs, access permissions, and executive communications connected to Administrative Account Admin 47. She looked at the executive operations manager. You are instructed not to contact any employee involved in this matter until the investigation is complete. The manager looked as if he wanted to argue. Instead, he lowered his eyes. Corporate security stepped aside. Nobody reached for Claire's laptop again. Frank quietly let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Melissa smiled. For the first time that morning, Nolan remained silent. He had imagined this company would one day face difficult decisions. He never imagined one of those decisions would begin with himself standing outside its front door. Rebecca turned toward him. Mr. Mercer, the board requests your presence. Nolan nodded. I'll meet with them. Then he looked at Claire. You'll come too? She seemed surprised. I'm not a board member. No. He smiled gently. You're the reason they'll know the truth. Several hours later, the board unanimously approved an independent investigation led entirely outside the company's executive structure. The administrative authority connected to Admin 47 was suspended immediately. Employees who had reported concerns in the past would all receive confidential invitations to speak with investigators. No one was promised promotions. No one was offered money to stay quiet. No public celebration was held. Justice did not arrive as applause. It arrived as accountability. Before leaving headquarters that afternoon, Nolan finally walked back to the main entrance with Lily. The same security guard who had stopped him that morning stood at his post. His shoulders were tense. I'm sorry, sir. Nolan shook his head. You followed the information you were given. The guard looked confused. I still turned you away. You treated me respectfully. Nolan extended his hand. That's the part I'll remember. The guard slowly shook it. Lily slipped her small hand into her father's. So, are you still putting Mom's picture inside? Nolan looked at the framed photograph she had protected all day. Not today. She looked disappointed. Why? Because there are people inside that building whose stories need to be heard first. She thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled. I think Mom would like that. I think so too. As they walked toward the parking lot, Nolan glanced back at the building he had spent decades creating. For years he believed leadership meant making the right decisions. Now he understood something much harder. Leadership also meant building a place where ordinary people could safely tell you when your decisions were wrong. From the perspective of someone simply watching this story unfold, one lesson stands above everything else. A person's dignity should never depend on the clothes they wear, the car they drive, the job they hold, or the balance in their bank account. Some people have wealth. Some people struggle to pay next month's rent. Neither circumstance changes their value as human beings. The greatest mistake we can make is deciding who deserves respect before we know their story. If we treat someone kindly only because they turn out to be powerful, then our kindness was never real. Real character is revealed when we offer patience, respect, and compassion to people who appear to have nothing they can give us in return. That morning, Nolan happened to be the founder of the company. But long before anyone knew that, he was simply a father trying to keep a promise to his daughter. And that alone should have been enough to earn basic respect. Sometimes the strongest companies are not the ones with the highest profits. They are the ones whose doors open with the same dignity for every person who stands outside them.